hesitation was how you lost time, and time was what cruel men always stole first. Catherine understood it too. She kept her cup lifted in her mind more often than in her hand, refusing to drink the comfort they wanted her to swallow. Because the threat wasn't theoretical anymore. It had faces now. Names now. The kind of threat that didn't arrive with a fist. It arrived with a list of necessary steps. The first attempt at coercion came disguised as charity. A respectable woman arrived at Bell River with a bundle of folded cloth and a smile that looked practiced. She brought condolences, offered advice, and spoke about help the way you speak about a fever, like the patient had no choice in the treatment. "Miss Catherine," the woman said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "They're saying you're distressed. That refusing marriage means you can't manage your duties." Duties. Ownership dressed in gentility. Catherine's answer was calm. "Tell them I'm managing perfectly well." The woman hesitated, then continued anyway, because she wasn't there to persuade. She was there to test. "There will be a replacement candidate," she murmured. "Someone suitable. Someone appointed to ensure the household remains stable." Appointed. Not asked. Not offered. Marcus felt Sarah's attention shift like a blade being drawn. She stood a few paces away, close enough to hear everything, far enough to appear like she wasn't listening, because in 1847 a woman's accidentally overheard words were still dangerous. Catherine didn't flinch. "If they appoint," she said quietly, "then they admit the truth. They don't respect my consent." The woman's smile tightened, then she left, quickly, as if the house itself had become contagious. That night, Catherine gathered Marcus and Sarah. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "They're going to isolate me," she said. Sarah's eyes hardened. "And they'll do it with people you can't openly refuse without looking guilty." Marcus understood immediately. Social isolation wasn't only loneliness. It was the removal of witnesses. It was the shrinking of the room until the only thing left was the threat. Catherine's mouth went thin. "They'll try to make me dependent. And then they'll call it protection," Sarah said. Marcus swallowed. "What's their first move?" Catherine didn't answer right away. She looked toward the doorway, toward the yard, and Marcus realized she was listening to something he couldn't hear: footsteps, pauses, the way servants shifted when new visitors approached. Then she spoke. "They'll deny entry. They'll restrict access to correspondence and papers. They'll send help that's really surveillance." Sarah exhaled, slow. "And then they'll push the replacement candidate through the household in public," she said. "When I'm watching. When you're watching. When it's impossible to pretend it wasn't planned." Catherine nodded once. And then the real cruelty arrived, not as a dramatic scene, but as a sequence of petty cruelties meant to erode confidence. The invitation stopped. The neighbors who once called began to cancel their visits with sudden, convenient illness. Letters were mislaid. Supplies were delayed. Servants received instructions that were never written down, only implied: "Don't gather. Don't question. Don't repeat." Marcus tried to track it anyway, but each new restriction felt like the tightening of a rope, less loud than a snap, more certain than a scream. When a message finally did reach him, it came through a messenger who wouldn't meet his eyes. Marcus, watching it all, felt the horror shift one notch deeper. Not just cruelty anymore. Purpose. They weren't simply being targeted. They were being studied, assessed, hunted. And now Catherine knew it. She lifted her chin, as if bracing for impact, and spoke with quiet finality. Let them come. In public. With witnesses. Because if the household had to become a battlefield, then Catherine would choose where the fighting happened. Not in a locked room. Not in secrecy. Not in the dark. The next morning, Bell River looked the same. Shutters shut. Paths worn by routine. The same routines that were supposed to mean everything was normal, supposed to soothe anyone watching for signs of collapse. But Marcus knew the difference between unchanged and enduring. What had changed wasn't the house. It was the air inside it. Because word travels in Lowndes County the way smoke travels, slowly at first, then all at once, until everyone thinks they were there when the first spark happened. By noon, the neighborhood had gathered just close enough to pretend it was coincidence. Not close enough to be rude. Close enough to be useful. Because if you wanted a woman coerced in 1847, you didn't have to touch her. You only had to make sure the entire town watched her either submit, or be punished for resisting. Sarah stepped out first, posture steady, face composed into something that looked like indifference. She didn't ask anyone to leave. She didn't plead. She just stood in the doorway with Catherine behind her, and Marcus at her shoulder with the papers hidden in plain sight. The replacement candidate arrived again, flanked this time by two men who didn't speak much, men whose silence carried permission. Behind them came the town representative, now dressed in a sharper certainty, as if each new attempt had ironed out whatever doubt remained. Miss Catherine, the representative began, voice louder. We're here to ensure proper legal arrangement for the stability of the household. Catherine didn't turn her head toward Marcus, but Marcus felt her decision settle anyway, felt it like a change in pressure in the room. Stability, she repeated, tasting the word. For whom? The representative's smile tightened. For all parties involved. Then you won't mind transparency, Catherine said. She stepped forward by a single pace, enough to bring her voice to every ear nearby. If you want proper legal arrangement, she continued, then you state your reasons in public. You explain what you believe makes my refusal unfit. And you do it with witnesses who will record your words accurately. A murmur moved through the crowd, the way a breeze moves through tall grass. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Some leaned in. Because it's one thing to enforce power behind closed doors. It's another to perform it where everyone can see the seams. The representative's gaze flicked around, calculating how much of his authority depended on secrecy. Then he tried a different tactic. He targeted Catherine's reputation, not her body. You've been difficult, he said. Unsettled. Influenced by unusual counsel. Sarah's eyes flashed, just once, at the insult to her sister's autonomy. Marcus felt the urge to intervene, to speak, to tear the lie apart in the open. But Catherine didn't give him the opening. She only asked the question that turned gossip into evidence. Unusual counsel. She repeated. Which counsel, exactly? Name them. Describe what influence you believe exists. Because if you're accusing, you're testifying, and I intend to respond in kind." The representative hesitated. Because accusations were easy when they stayed vague. Accusations became dangerous when you forced them to become specific. So he reached for the language of threat. "This isn't optional," he said. "The courts." Catherine cut him off, voice quiet but carrying. "Then the courts will review your claim publicly." The representative's face hardened. "If you resist, you will be compelled." Compelled. Marcus felt his hands tense around the papers. He knew that word. He knew what it meant when men used it around women. He knew how quickly procedure became violence. But Catherine wasn't backing up. She lifted her chin and addressed the crowd as if addressing the whole county. "Let there be no confusion," she said. "If you bring coercion, you'll bring it into the light. And if you attempt to erase my consent with documents, those documents will be examined. Those words will be repeated." A few people looked suddenly afraid, because they realized what Catherine was doing. She wasn't just refusing. She was forcing a trap. Making it so that every attempt to break her would also reveal how they planned to do it. The representative's voice tightened. "You think the town will protect you?" Catherine's smile was small and sharp. "No." She paused, and Marcus saw Sarah's expression change, saw the realization hit her too. Catherine wasn't asking for protection. She was preparing the record. "I think the town will witness," Catherine said. "And witnesses don't let men pretend later that they never had a choice." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then one of the silent men shifted his stance, uncomfortable, like he couldn't decide whether his authority would hold if Catherine kept speaking. The representative exhaled, forcing control back into his tone. "We'll proceed with the petition." Catherine nodded once. "Good." Sarah leaned toward Marcus and spoke under her breath, so only the three of them could hear. "Now we keep our eyes on the timeline. Because even when coercion came, it had to come in stages. Calendars could be tracked. Dates could be documented. People could be named. And while the men thought they were building a quiet victory, Marcus was building something else, something that could survive their silence. That night, after the crowd thinned and the visitors' footsteps faded, Marcus sat at the table with ink and paper spread out. Catherine stood across from him, staring at the pages as if she could already see the courtroom they were headed toward. Sarah moved behind Marcus and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, steadying him without asking permission. "They'll try again," Sarah said. "They will," Marcus replied. Catherine's voice was almost calm now, almost tired. "But they'll try in public," she said, "every time they can't resist the urge to force what they should ask for." Marcus wrote until his wrist ached. Not because he believed writing could stop all violence, but because he understood the only thing horror ever hated more than resistance. Certainly, the petition wasn't a single document. It was a weapon assembled in layers, each one meant to make Catherine's refusal look less like a decision and more like a malfunction. Over the next days, men came and went with papers that never stopped multiplying. Clerks arrived to ask questions that were really inspections. New visitors arrived with sympathy that tasted like judgment. And every time Catherine refused to cooperate with their version of events, the words changed, rewritten to fit the violence. Disturbed, they said. Unstable. Influenced. Marcus knew the pattern now. Once the narrative was built, the outcome would be treated as inevitable. Like syphilis treated in the quarters, managed not as human suffering, but as a line item in a ledger. So Marcus did what he'd been doing since he first opened Colonel Sutton's journals. He tracked. He compared. He built a chain that could not be severed. He began gathering testimony, not grand statements, not speeches meant for newspapers that never reached people like them, but small, precise recollections. Who was present? Who spoke? What was promised? What was threatened? And then, when the petition hearings finally drew near, Catherine made her next move. She didn't plead. She prepared. She requested meetings with those who were most likely to remember details, neighbors who had watched the replacements come and go, servants who understood how to read a lie by the way a sentence paused, even a local printer's assistant who could swear what was written and when. Marcus watched Sarah oversee it like a general with a scalpel. "Keep it clean," Sarah instructed. "No exaggeration. No cruelty. Just facts. Let their claims collapse under the weight of their own words." Catherine nodded, eyes focused. "And if they try to intimidate witnesses?" Marcus asked. Sarah's mouth tightened. "Then we document that too." It wasn't mercy. It was accounting. On the morning of the hearing, the air smelled like dust and paper, like a building preparing to digest someone's life. Men sat with the confidence of people who believed law meant safety. But in 1847, law also meant the sanctioned version of control. Marcus felt Catherine's presence beside him and understood, with a jolt, that this wasn't only about whether she could refuse marriage again. It was about whether the world could be forced to admit what everyone already suspected. That proper was often just another name for cruelty performed politely. The representative stood first. He spoke smoothly, describing Catherine's behavior as if it were a disease in need of treatment. He referenced stability again and again. He implied that her refusal made her unfit, that she couldn't manage her own household, that someone else, someone appointed, should step in. Catherine didn't interrupt. Not yet. Marcus watched as a few people in the room shifted uncomfortably, because not everyone wanted to hear the truth spoken aloud, especially when the truth would require them to choose sides. Then Catherine stepped forward. Her voice carried, clear and unsoftened. "You claim I'm unfit because I refuse marriage you have arranged," she said. "So answer this. What authority grants you the right to override consent?" The representative's jaw tightened. "The court exists." Catherine lifted a hand slightly, stopping him without raising her voice. "The court exists, yes. Then you will allow witnesses to speak truthfully about your actions." The representative glanced toward someone off to the side, someone with a pen ready to record. Then he made his mistake. He tried to frame Catherine as obstructive, tried to make it sound like her refusal was the only problem, as if intimidation and paperwork had never existed. It might have worked. It might have. If Marcus hadn't anticipated the maneuver. He rose with the papers in his hands, carefully, deliberately. Not rushed. Not defensive. He laid out dates and names in order, showing a timeline of visits, threats, restricted communications, and concern that functioned as coercion. He didn't accuse wildly. He didn't need to. Because the evidence was enough to let the room decide what it already felt. As Marcus spoke, the representative's confidence thinned like candle wax. The men who had come to assist began to shift in their seats. And a few witnesses, small people with unremarkable voices, were suddenly brave enough to say what they'd seen. They described how the replacement candidate had been introduced as if Catherine had no say. How help had been offered right before new restrictions tightened. How the representative had used words like procedure, compelled, and stability, as if those phrases were shields. No one could pretend afterward that they didn't hear it. Catherine watched the representative as if memorizing his face for later. Not for revenge. For documentation. When the hearing ended, the room didn't explode. No one cheered. No one declared justice. But something had shifted. The representative left looking less certain than when he arrived, like a man who had just realized that public records were a different kind of weapon than threats. That night, Bell River felt quieter again. But quieter didn't mean safe. Marcus sat with ink drying on his fingers and realized the horror had changed shape once more. It wasn't only violence now. It was the fear of being seen, fear that made men scramble, fear that made them act clumsier, fear that made the system wobble. Sarah came to stand behind him. "You did well," she said. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Because he could still hear the representative's voice, softening danger with paperwork. And he could still see Catherine's face when she demanded witnesses. He finally said it aloud, voice low. "They're learning that silence isn't theirs to control." Catherine joined them then, placing a hand on the table near Marcus's papers. "We'll keep them afraid of records," she said. And Marcus understood what part of their survival actually meant now. Not escaping the Sutton network. Outwitting it.